year between July and May. And when I was asked to do this talk, it reminded me of a comment that John Spencer, the late great John Spencer, who played Leo McGarry in The West Wing, but prior to that had played Tommy Mullaney in LA Law. And when he was approached to play this role in The West Wing, he actually said, no more hour drama, because the schedule was so relentless. I've also recently watched an interview with Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, some of which maybe myself would agree was the best television drama ever made. And even he was only ever afforded the luxury of making perhaps more than 3 takes of a scene twice in the entire time he was making that show. So as a result, if you have to make television in these constricted ways, of course, it has to be very quick, and it rules out the type of person, certain types of people to participate. And so Rowan Aust, our introductory speaker and keynote speaker today, is a lecturer in television studies and production at the University of Huddersfield, and her research looks exactly at this issue, the extent to which you can have care within television production and the extent to which its unrelenting schedule, long hours and the use of casual labour actually excludes participation within the television industry. So I think that your talk, Rowan, is very timely and will be of interest both to amateurs like myself and to most of the people who are going to participate today. I'd also like, before I hand back to Elke, to congratulate her on adopting this format of a slow conference. I think all of us over the last 2 years have had, or at least tried to participate in an online conference that's gone over 2 or 3 days. And it really is death by conference if you want to do that sat on Zoom. And so I think this format worked very well last year. I'm sure it will this year. I'd like to congratulate you again for putting this together. But you've all turned up not to listen to me speak, you've turned up to listen to Rowan speak. And so I'll hand back to Elke, who will introduce her formally. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jo. I will just share my screen with you quickly because I have a few that I want to show. So first of all, also from me, a very warm welcome to the Critical Studies in Television Conference. I am happy to say that, as always, we're obviously working with Critical Studies in Television, for which I am one of the 3 ECRIA editors. I am also the head of the Television Studies Research Group, which is based at Edge Hill University, and who we have quite a few numbers actually presenting and contributing to this conference. So do make sure that you're part of all of this. The wonderful thing with our Television Studies Research Group as well is that it gives us really an opportunity to come together to talk about television in all its forms and really support each other, including new scholars. Before we start the conference, just some housekeeping. So we're using Teams and we will record all sessions. I am recording this session now because obviously we want to be able to share it with the larger conference team. And, you know, we have 180 people registered and some of them are currently asleep because they're in New Zealand or in India or wherever they are. We will upload the sessions on the Institute of Social Responsibility's YouTube channel. I will share the links as soon as they become available. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking and use the hand raising emoji if you want to speak. That is at the bottom of the screen, or should be at the bottom of the screen, and look, as you can see here. Please feel free to use the chat. The chat is right next to the hand raising emoji, which is the bubble. And usually the chat, like last year, the chat was very, very active and we had some absolutely amazing discussions through the chat that was then also, you know, discussed with the participants, so that we were really able to have quite complex conversations and everyone could be heard. We have one final session move at the moment, which is panel 11 on Monday, the 4th of July. Will go on to Wednesday, 6th of July. And the panel 12 will go earlier in order to make way for panel 11. but I'll send you an updated schedule as soon as I have it. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Obviously, you can email the 2 email addresses that I think you've all seen. Please tweet CST Conference 2022 and send us pictures of what you're up to, or what the weather is like, because that enables us to just get a sense more of who we are as people. And other people use or other conferences have used some sort of social networking thing, but I found that really stilted and not very helpful. So I thought, do you know what, if you do it via social media, maybe sending out pictures on social media via Twitter, for example, or indeed have something at the beginning of each day that gives us a sense of what people are up to, I think that might do the trick as well. So that was me in housekeeping. Now let me hand over to Dr. Rowan Aust. So she teaches television production and industries at University of Huddersfield, but she is also the co-editor of Share My Telly Job. And Share My Telly Job is really a fantastic organization that tries to work for inclusion, equality and diversity in the television industry. Jo has already pointed out some of the problems that the television industry has, but one of the biggest ones is really the long and incredibly unsociable working hours. The interesting thing for me is that I, for a long time, thought this was absolutely the norm everywhere. I kind of knew that also from Germany. Obviously, we hear it from America as well, and in the UK, it's incredibly rife. But I went to a conference in Aarhus one day and had the fortune of sitting next to a producer from Yellowbird, who were responsible for the wonderful Wallander, which you might remember. And when I spoke to him, he basically told me that working hours there are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, just like any other job. And I wondered how that was possible, how they could manage to get all the work done, etc. And he said, well, you just get it done in the same way as you get other work done. You schedule it in such a way as to get it done in the time that you have. So it really highlighted to me how a different approach to scheduling the production process can really facilitate a much more inclusive work culture. Rowan will address this topic with a wonderful talk about EDI, so equality, diversity and inclusion, which she called EDI, Once More with Feeling. And I hand over to you, Rowan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the introduction and for having me today. I'm very flattered to be asked to do this. If anyone feels, by the way, like putting their camera on, I'm someone who quite likes to see the faces of people I'm talking to, so please feel free, should you be comfortable with that. So I want to talk today about the ways in which the feeling of working in television production can be understood and used to renew an EDI agenda that is palpably not working. I believe we are failing the people our scholarship is supposed to help. And yes, in our case, I believe it should be helpful because we haven't as yet addressed how it feels to work in television while being the other. Examples of this include the mother, embarrassed and worried to leave the office to collect her kids, while the fathers in the room are lauded for doing exactly that. We haven't accounted for the feeling of being the only person of colour in an all-white newsroom, and how that fast turnaround, high-pressure environment amplifies difference. Think of the sound, and a newsroom is a place where voices are raised, abounding with the repetitive echo of the Southern English accented. How does it feel to be in these environments if you are, in Sam Friedman's terms, operating under cultural disequilibrium? What if you are not male, white, middle class and non-disabled? Friedman describes the sensory dislocation of social mobility, the unease and the dissonance that are felt, not necessarily explicit, social inequality that an environment cannot or will not accommodate. How is this dislocation amplified by the elite environment of television production, as well as its product, the programmes we all watch, being so prominent in our cultural and often social lives? If you work in TV, its product is inescapable. Anne O'Brien articulates the consequences of these experiences in her analysis of how social and cultural capital accumulates in established male networks and results in women leaving the television industry. In Access All Areas, Sir Lenny Henry describes the necessity to dispense with your black working class tastes and align more with your boss's preferences. How can applying an understanding of the feelings engendered by these environments change the way we address EDI? A note here, although as I'm assuming you all know, EDI stands for equality or equity and diversity and inclusivity or inclusion. There are also alternative ways the words are arranged, most often DEI, to refer to the set of practices that come under this umbrella. By using EDI, I do not want to imply a hierarchy of need within these practices, which I think of as all practices employed to achieve equity. I will use the word equity in this paper as a shorthand reference to these practices. I prefer equity to equality because it implies a knowledge of the structural gap that it requires filling in order for a person to operate on an equitable basis. Diversity, meanwhile, cannot happen without equity, and we cannot be inclusive without diversity. And while I don't want to make any more of an issue of the taxonomy, the fact I include this definition of use speaks to the ways in which language is sometimes used punitively within the EDI space, and the way in which this can be prohibitive for those who feel they are unsure of the correct terms to use. This, I believe, is not helpful. I do, however, want to make it clear I'm talking about minoritized groups along lines of race, gender, class, age, and sexuality, of maternal status and marital status, and of understanding the needs of disabled and neurodiverse people, and how all of these groups experience and feel working in television production. I also cite research looking at film production and the creative industries more broadly, as, although there are certainly specificities opposite to television work, part of my thesis is that research needs to be pulled where applicable, and it is problematic and obstructive not to do so. There is already a great deal of work on the feeling of working in television and the comparable cultural industries. Tom Burns described a BBC type as operating in the 1960s and 70s, identifying who a typical BBC worker might be or assimilate towards. Georgina Bourne described the potential of TV work as glittering, situating the elite achievement of access and the rewards of such work if one ascends the ranks. Both writers detail the behavioural codes of working at the BBC. Please particularly see the passages where Bourne recalls her encounters with Alan Yentob. Successful negotiation of these environments demands adherence to behavioural codes. These are exactly the codes likely satirised in programmes such as W1A, a show which a BBC presenter recently told me, quite seriously, that they couldn't bear to watch because it mitigated BBC management's culture of threat. David Hesmanhage and Sarah Baker have analysed the emotional toll of TV work, an essay which takes on a new light if understood through a prism of this threat. Social media abounds with groups discussing the experience of working in TV and an understanding of this TV type, including, but not an exhaustive list, Black in TV, Deaf and Disabled in TV, Shit Men in TV Have Said to Me, Nice Folk Who Work in Telly, and TV Hell. These groups are predicated in contrast to this type and are a manifest protest against requirement to conform and behave in a particular way. With emphasis on the surrounding creative industries, Angela McRobbie has described the requirements of perfectionism, and Ros Gill the required performance of confidence and the unspoken agile sexism that is internalized and rendered unspeakable. To continue the focus on gender, in parallel to the academic work, there has been a litany of more popular books understanding the felt experience of women. A list that includes, but is not limited to, Laura Bates' Men Who Hate Women and Fix the System, Not the Women, Marianne Sieghart's The Authority Gap, Shani Orgard's Heading Home, Caroline Carrazzo Perez, Invisible Women, and Kate Mann's Down Girl and Entitled. You get the picture. To summarise, next year marks 60 years since Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique. I cannot adequately detail here the enormous amount of work that's already been done, aside from the fact that I think the point that men and women operate on unequal ground has been made, and inequalities are further intersected across the characteristics of race, disability, neurodiversity, and so on. These understood, proven inequalities are the basis of EDI work. Attention is being paid and has been for decades. However, as Clive James Nwonga has pointed out, such attention has historically been an industrial rather than an ethical policy. This presupposes there was, and is, nothing inherently discriminatory about the industry, which then avoids accounting for the ethics of nepotism, informal recruitment practices, and cultural elitism. In other words, EDI has not accounted for the feeling of negotiating this world when one is already labouring under discriminations based on gender, class, race, and so on. What happens if EDI shifts towards an ethical policy? How do we frame policy in moral terms without opening up all manner of subjective demands? Except, isn't that already happening? EDI is, in its existence, a moral concern. However, the moral imperative of EDI cannot be realised without understanding the feeling of this work, because without it, a politics of assimilation remains at the heart of the agenda. Behave as your very likely white, male, middle class, privately educated, often Oxbridge networked seniors, and you too shall rise. Understanding the codes of behaviour embodied in this spaces by such senior staff is crucial to understanding the ways in which these codes are felt as barriers if one is not fluent in them. To go back to the newsroom example, if one is fluent in such codes and operates with relative comfort, progression is easier. If one is inhibited by discomfort, it will stymie a career, while as one works to overcome the discomfort to fit in, the environment is demanding the additional labour of assimilation. We know, meanwhile, that EDI is failing, as waves of reports repeat the ways in which equality has not been achieved. In just the previous 2 years, from both Ofcom and from the Creative Diversity Network, often known as Diamond, reports have discussed the ways in which parity has not been achieved across any of the protected characteristics, as did disability by design and race to be heard. Locked Down and Locked Out discussed the ways in which women working in TV were additionally penalised by childcare responsibilities during the pandemic lockdowns. State of Play illuminated nepotism, class prejudice, and bullying. Clive Nwonga and Sarita Malik stated last year that the apparatus of diversity has not successfully tackled structural inequalities. The Creative Majority Report reiterated this across the creative industries. EDI is, of course, not new. Awareness of the need for representation is evidenced by Channel 4's original commissioning structure. Its 1982 multicultural department was run by Sue Woodford, a woman of colour who held 2 protected weekly slots for her department to fill. This was an address to the feeling of watching television and never seeing yourself, the feeling of being culturally excluded. In this way, I believe EDI has, in some ways, been talking about feeling all along. Representation on screen remains, 40 years later, woefully white. If it didn't, there would be no requirement for initiatives such as Channel 4's Black to Front from last September. That's 40 years of work of understanding the need, the public service responsibility, and yet failing to a point where a single day of programming is given over to people of colour and somehow billed as a point of progression. Channel 4 have on their website that the purpose of the project is twofold. Firstly, to challenge us all to see our content differently, and secondly, to leave a lasting legacy in terms of increased Black representation both on and off screen. There is a startling lack of reflection, or perhaps even awareness, of what has gone before. Likewise, class. Is the fact of Daisy May Cooper, Sophie Winnan, or Big Zoo receiving BAFTAs really a point of self-congratulation for the industry? Or should it be an embarrassment that working class voices, decades after the Liver Birds, Bread, Victoria Wood, EastEnders, Coronation Street, Boys from the Black Stuff, Our Friends from the North, Cathy Come Home, as with everything I'm discussing here, the list can continue, that these voices are still so unusual in our most celebrated television as to make headlines? Could it be that the requirement when working in TV to assimilate into middle classness is where feeling becomes an obstruction to be obliterated, ultimately a stripping of identity that results in these voices feeling new and alien to the television grandees who vote for the BAFTAs? And if I'm wrong, why does this disconnect happen? So, what to do? We need to understand and communicate the lived experience of television workers and the barriers against progression for those who inhabit protected characteristics. Everything stems from this. EDI must be renewed through the prism of integrated care, both understanding the failure of EDI to integrate and care for those excluded from television work, and the necessity to reconceptualize EDI and principles of dependency. EDI should not be an adjunct. It should not be achieved through programs, schemes, and initiatives, where the initiative becomes the outcome. EDI should instead be an attack on the underpinning exclusionary practices inherent to television work. It should be an introduction and integration of care. By care, I suggest Joan Tronto's summation of recognition, action, giving, and receiving of care. Care becomes continuous and unending in this model. This model is informed by a principle of dependency, of understanding collaborative work, such as television production is, to use Eva Fiedler-Kitte's phrase, as work in which one understands oneself as operating as and being part of a network of selves in relation, where care is an inevitable byproduct of this understanding and this shift in mindset. This is in explicit opposition to, as she phrases it, the ideal of the citizen and worker as independent and self-sufficient. In understanding the prosaic, the everyday, work and life through a network of interrelated acts of care and dependency, the punitive ideal of independent self-sufficiency, the freelance context, can be mitigated. Kitte, who writes about care and disability, is informed by her own lived experience of being mother to a disabled child, and states that she aspires to promote conditions that avoid turning the precariousness of disability and inevitable dependencies into an added precarity for the disabled person. The identification of EDI is because we see the difficulty and precariousness of negotiating an elite profession, television, if one has the additional labour of a protected characteristic. EDI, in its existence, recognises the inevitable dependencies of being outside the norms of a television worker, which has historically been and remains white, male, middle class, and non-disabled. These dependencies are the help one needs to access the work. Being part of the other, most clearly recognisable of having a protected characteristic, is a statement that a person is in some way precarious. It is precarity that EDI work purports to address. And yet, the fact that EDI work continues after decades as part of the TV production landscape points to its failures. It does, in fact, add in precarity, additional to the freelance context and the informality that characterises television work, that we know through Natalie Rayford, David Lee, Gillian Ursel, Neil Percival, and others is exploitative and even debilitating. Through EDI's continued emphasis on the other who is requiring of help, there is an emphasis on the outsider, the bodies who are being given help to access the glitter of the TV world. There is here the notion of sensory precarity, a psychic consequence of being outside the norm, of needing to assimilate, of the necessity of the additional labour in order to make these assimilatory jumps of behaviour. Recall the mother required to assimilate and disguise her childcare responsibilities, to negotiate silently and privately the private and public spheres, while the father in the office is applauded for leaving early. Why is exceptionalism gifted to men who demonstrate active care for their children, but not afford it to women? How does it feel to never feel comfortable, to experience persistent disequilibrium? How is this discomfort amplified in an industry which post-Me Too still tolerates sexual harassment, as Muriel Beale's work has highlighted? How is this discomfort amplified again by a culture of overwork, as the Time Project has found? Overwork mitigates feeling because it is deadening, and indeed the mental health crisis of television workers has been shown with the film and TV charities Looking Glass reports. We at SMTJ know both anecdotally and from the Time Project data that the preponderance of working 60+ hours a week, and I want to assert something astoundingly unacademic at this point. How would you feel after working such a punishing schedule over multiple weeks, as television production projects require? What's the empathetic, sympathetic approach to this knowledge? To dismiss it as a characteristic of the industry, or to understand it as preventative of equity, and therefore, if you as a scholar are invested in EDI in any sense, should your work mitigate the long hours, or promote them by proxy? Or, to ask the question in a more academic manner, how does investigating these environmental factors work towards an understanding of how those who inhabit the protected characteristics are made to feel? Because there is more diversity in new entrants, but the reality of working in television means there is a startling rate of attrition. How can we investigate environmental factors as the explanation for why so many workers leave before they reach senior positions, which remain, I'll say it again, so white, male, non-disabled and middle class? If this is considered, we start to see what has long been obscured by an address to the industrial mechanisms of making television rather than their consequences. These consequences of the way television is made, is experienced, is felt, they are the structural underpinnings of those mechanisms. As production studies academics, we must think more carefully about the consequences of what we teach. The punitive effect of the long hours culture is one of those consequences. We must not just teach what has happened or how television has always been made, but try to envelop care into teaching. Inequity is underpinned by the long working hours culture of television. Again, turning to Anne O'Brien, it is a demanding masculinist culture of what the market wants, that systematically works to disadvantage women and sometimes even force women out of media careers. Childcare demands certain hours. Children must be cared for within the confines of their timetable, so parents, in reality mostly mothers, must leave the workforce because working hours, paid work, will not bend. For women, also read anyone with additional responsibilities, or even the simple desire not to devote their entire lives to their work. Does work have to be a lifestyle? Is that really so radical a question? Can we reconceptualize television work away from the glittering potential, where much of it is quite ordinary in its pleasures and can be treated as such, so the driver for these long hours is diluted? Proving the widely understood within the industry, but little studied culture of long hours, a process Beck2 started with their Eyes Half Shut campaign in 2017, was why we at SMTJ formulated and continue the aforementioned Time Project, which tracks working hours across TV and film production. The recent Screen Industries Growth Network and SMTJ report on the first 6 months of the Time Project found that women work longer hours and are paid less. This gap only narrows, it never closes, when women reach positions of notable seniority, by which time, of course, many other women have left. This engenders the post-feminist neoliberal illusion that if some can make it, others can too. Rosgill's agile sexism writ large. Meanwhile, many senior women report ways in which they negotiate privately, just for the staff they manage, ways to introduce parity through management of hours. Equity, in the shape of better and best practice, is possible, but remains siloed. This is because there is no industry-wide regulation of working hours, which allows the masculinist culture to thrive and pockets of best practice to remain obscured, so much so that when workers alight upon them, they are deemed lucky for the duration of that particular job. Shame is also induced, the feeling that a worker might not be doing her job properly if more work hours are required, or that she is unable to withstand the demands placed upon her, because there is no understanding of shared conditions across the industry. By collecting and sharing anonymously data related to roles and characteristics, the Time Project addresses this knowledge gap. It is also longitudinal. EDI programs are generally short-term, so do not follow their participants through their careers, although we know many do drop out from the makeup of senior staff. There needs to be collaborative longitudinal research akin to the BFI's television industry tracking study of the 1990s. The Time Project is this collective endeavour and has so far demonstrated the endemic long hours. The report found TV workers do, weekly, 14 hours additional work above the national average. That's 2 days extra work. The data can be used to understand working patterns across characteristic, job role and region, locating the pressures placed upon particular groups. It builds a narrative of a worker's life through their own data, collating information across and about the industry from the worker's point of view. This also works to mitigate the atomization of the industry. This atomization is rife in television work, so how can we impress upon students the need to understand themselves as working in relation to one another? We need to, because inequities are generated by atomization. My own research on gratitude reiterates the entrenching of inequity through gratitude for what is seen as dispensations, such as holiday pay, and even for simple inclusion. Workers are haunted by the possibilities of worse treatment elsewhere, either within or without the television industry, to the point where they withstand poor conditions as avoidance of potential abuse. How, then, should we teach production techniques so students understand themselves as in relation to each other? The constituent parts of TV work are rarely explained once a career commences, and the fact that so little time is given to understanding other roles is a key reason roles become siloed. Workers develop specialisms very quickly, and other roles become obscured, an amplification of the atomization. One potential mitigating address to students is to teach budgeting and scheduling, so they understand the primary tasks of production management. This is an area of television work that is historically feminized, many production managers being framed as mothers of the team, with concomitantly lower rates of pay and status in comparison to equivalent editorial work. There is an opportunity for us as educators to address this inequity through increased teaching of production management. Encouraging more men inevitably rebalances the status of the work. Will men take part in this historically devalued work to engage in the process of recalibration? Will male scholars invested in auteur theory and the ways in which this is replicated across the academy encourage them? This necessity is part of the puzzle in teaching television production, where the body of the director or producer is historically male, the status of that position sustained by auteur theory. For a view of the deleterious effects of auteur theory, please watch Film Worker. This 27 documentary details the career of Leon Vitali, who worked with Stanley Kubrick from Barry Lyndon onwards. It reveals that none of the post-Lyndon films bannered with Kubrick's authorial authority could have happened without Vitali, because Vitali was the route to the realization of Kubrick's vision. And yet the hierarchy of value has erased his contribution. How then to mitigate the sustained hierarchies? At SMTJ, we approach the need for heads of departments and managers to adopt an integrated communicative approach through practices such as job sharing, which inculcates a more even distribution of time across work and life. This is practice preventative of a cult of personality, mitigating the dominance of auteur theory. Job sharing is when two people share a job, and included within it is overlap time to understand what has happened while one's partner has been doing the job. It remains a minority practice, but has been proven to work in a variety of roles, including production managers, coordinators, editors, edit producers, production designers, art directors, graphic artists, casting producers, and costume supervisors. Kelly Crawford and Jonathan Aspinwall used to share the deputy news editor role at BBC Breakfast. SMTJ is about to share the next step, where women are stepping up from producer to series producer by job sharing. As part of this, we offer management training, a process revealing of the chronic lack of such training in the industry. Workers are not instructed in how to manage the competing forces of a production project, indicative of the lack of training across the industry. We are also placing job pairs into craft and tech roles in high-end TV. Despite this, there remains a misnomer that job sharing is something for the mums, ghettoising maternity as the reason people ask for flexible working. It is, however, not a charitable act for mothers, but a practical, achievable advance towards equity, which needs to be understood from university level as something applicable across the industry. There are other possibilities of renewing EDI and pursuing, again referring to Naronka and Malik, a discussion about how the industry can collectively develop not just a language, but a practice of equality and inclusion. One is through the union. How can we, the Academy, support union membership and encourage students towards a collective body? Can there be policy engagement around a mandatory model akin to Actors and Equity, where after university instruction and training there is a centralised body, a union, without membership of which you are unable to work in film and TV? This would, of course, terrify all of the broadcast institutions and many production companies, and be deemed unworkable on the grounds of stifling creativity, following the logic that the potential for exploitation is equally the ground required for creative freedom. There has been a longitudinal failure of EDI. It is this longitudinal failure, however, which also demonstrates the need for longitudinal data collection around who works in television, a need advocated for by Project Diamond, Ofcom, and here at SMTJ with the Time Project. There should be, of course, a pooling of data, and we hope to do this, mitigating Ofcom's conclusion with which we heartily agree that diversity and inclusion should be a collaborative activity, not a competitive sport. If this data is pooled, then it can be married to the oral history and qualitative work that is happening. How can we triangulate this work and a network be developed? Can this address the ways in which data collection was found by Peter Block in 2020 to be wanting, a description I admire for its marvellous restraint? Can a collaborative, longitudinal approach also move us away from divisions of identity as we discover commonalities of feeling? In conclusion, I believe there is cause for optimism. The post-lockdown terrain of TV production is in flux. New studios are being built, but the skills shortage, highlighted just this morning by a new report from Screen Skills, means there is tremendous opportunity for production culture to shift towards collectivity and collective bargaining. We can and must reconceptualise the industry so it becomes a site, to borrow from Angela McNorby, predicated on a politics of affinity that embraces difference as opposed to promoting assimilation. Sometimes this does demand a leap of the imagination. In Laura Bates' words, it is often difficult for those to see what they have never encountered. But by embracing and enveloping these ideas into teaching, Kitte's communitarian ethic of interdependence can be placed at the centre of all EDI work, as we endeavour collectively to recalibrate television work in a truly inclusive way. There is already an accumulation of understanding. Now we need to renew our approach to induct a sustainable cultural change. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. If we could perhaps, show our appreciation, that would be great. So we have quite a lot of time for questions, which is great. So I hand over. You can raise your hand or you can type into the chat, whatever's easiest. No one wants to go first, as always. I have to admit, I have a question which is quite specific to one point that you raised, but I thought was really so well observed and kind of also nicely brings us back into our end roundtable, which will be about the invisibility of television studies. But you were pointing out that, you know, there's so much work in a way that has been done and that is so often overlooked. That includes the programs that have already been made, but sometimes it's also the initiatives that have already happened. You know, if you think about the early Channel 4 initiatives, what can we, do you have any suggestions about what we can do to make these more visible? Is this something that we as scholars should maybe do more of?
Well, I think you know, a history needs to be written of EDI initiatives within film and TV. You know, one of the problems is, I think, that so much of the work is repeated over and over again because of its short-termism. So if there was some, you know, solid work, perhaps for a PhD student, to do to really collate this information in a way that can be presented, because, you know, we hear over and over again, oh, we tried that. And there is also the fact that many of the people that come in through these initiatives subsequently leave because they are not supported. And that's the point about the longitudinal work. You know, it's all very well being given 6 months when you're 24, but how are you supported to really progress through the industry? So, you know, that's work that needs to be done, and that's what I mean by kind of trying to generate a networked response. And that's really why I think the union is central to this work. And there needs to be a kind of a collective response to it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Great, thank you. Christine, you have your hand up.
You're muted, Christine.
Yeah.
Okay, how's that? Okay. Yes, I do mainly textual work, although I used to negotiate for the trade unions, so I'm really interested in your work, Rowan. But I thought I'd just offer a little example of something in my more recent work that came up somewhat unexpectedly for me, and is about the values that we place on in textual work, perhaps, or in work that isn't production studies. And that was, I was looking at Steve McQueen's Small Acts, which came out in the end of 2020. And what I became really interested by is that the way in which McQueen, as a Black director, was consistently framed as sort of being on his own, being an individual who made no compromises, you know, working for 10 years to get the program on television or indeed in film festivals, etc. And much of the surrounding discourse was all about him as a unique individual. And when I began to look at some of this, the publicity around around Small Acts, and look at some of the panels on which McQueen talked and others have participated, what became absolutely clear was that his work entirely relied on the work of others. The executive producer, and particularly Tracy Schofield, who was obviously a fantastic negotiator and got it, you know, effectively, I think, got it on screen. But that wasn't valued in the discussion in Sight and Sound or in the film journals or just in the press, where the emphasis was always on McQueen as an individual. So I think there is some work that even those of us who are not working directly on production can do, which is to try and spread our interest and not go for the showrunner approach all the time, but actually look a bit more closely at the range of people who are contributing to any one particular piece of work. And I think that's actually particularly important in television, but it's true in cinema as well. So, you know, thank you very much for your work. And I do think it speaks to those of us who are perhaps not teaching in the way areas you're teaching in.
Thank you. And yes, I mean, yeah. I think even just a mention of a showrunner. Showrunners tend to run writers' rooms, which are full of people, you know. So that in itself is a tiny example of the way in which showrunners don't operate by themselves. So yeah.
Sarah, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That was a really amazing introduction. I usually also do textual work around television, so a lot of this is new for me, but I was just wondering what you're thinking about sort of the current moment, and if there's any connection, or if you see any, you know, bigger amount of hope than usually with all of the strike action that has been going on. Of course, we have had it in the UCU, the University and College Union, but I feel like there's a lot of industrial action erupting now everywhere in the UK. So last week we had the RMT strikes, and I think many more strikes and sort of, you know, these industrial action things are happening now. And I wonder if you think that there's going to be more of that following the movement in the television industry as well, if there's even any connection between all of these movements. And yeah, what do you think about the immediate future in terms of unionization in the industry?
Well, I know that union membership is going up, which is great. It's really going up very quickly, although I don't have the exact figures to hand. I think what happened when production shut down during the first lockdown was there was a lot of online collectivizing. So a lot of these new groups kind of sprung up around Facebook and Instagram, where people were sharing their experiences. And there was a real increase in the understanding that I was trying to kind of articulate there of other people's jobs and conditions across the industry. So people didn't understand themselves as working under particularly unusual conditions. They began to see that other people were working these crazy hours. It wasn't that they were rubbish at their job. It wasn't that they had to withstand this just for the duration of that job. It wasn't that they were doing anything wrong, which we hear a lot. It was that the industry is built to exploit people within these kind of long hour structures. There was, of course, subsequently this, and it's still going on, the production boom. So people have had a glut of work since production has started up again. So this is kind of what's interesting is the way this is being refracted from various perspectives across the industry. If you get a body like PACT, so the chief exec of PACT, John McVeigh, has come out and said there's nothing to worry about. Workers are able to completely negotiate their rates, and they're totally happy, they're fine. Which in some cases, they can, and we hear about people leaving jobs which are palpably awful to go to a different one. However, there is a real skill shortage. Lots of people left, particularly women, during lockdown. And what's that's doing is a lot of people are working up above their grade. So you hear production secretaries working as production managers, and then they're not trained for their jobs. So productions are collapsing, and instead of there being a pause where production is perhaps, there's time to consider what's not working, people are working additional hours. So the schedules are still not being expanded to understand the new conditions. And that is also to do with the fact that commissioning tariffs have been frozen, I think, since, or frozen in real terms since about 2005. I'd have to check that exact date. But budgets are not going up. And this again speaks to the fact there needs to be a kind of collective address to the ways in which tariffs impact on schedules and the way in which that makes it impossible for people to complete their work in a way that isn't damaging to them. Of course, the other thing that's happening is that could be used to the advantage of this collective ideal is that people are working back-to-back jobs. So they're not getting the rest. If, say, people used to do, six weeks jobs amongst the season, which is kind of, March to December, they would have a rest in between those. Now they're working bang, bang, bang straight across. So the Looking Glass, the latest Looking Glass report from the Film and TV charity, was very interesting in that it highlighted that nothing has changed in the previous 2 years since they did it. There has been no sustained improvement in conditions for workers. So that's both kind of, we hold on to the possibility that there are conditions for improvement, but it does require more of an engagement across the different groups, to work together.
Super, Bethel.
Just finding my mic. Thanks, Rowan. That was really, really interesting and kind of ties in with some of the research I'm currently doing for Sign at the University of York. Yeah. So I'm looking at training, and I've been reading a lot about kind of, the history of training within the screen industries and the role that unions played and how that has obviously diminished. And thinking about sort of that collective action, and obviously the Screen Skills report that has just come out saying we're going to need a lot more training sort of over the next few years. Do you think, or can you see any ways that might change, that training in the industry might be improved or might become more collective so that we can start addressing some of the gaps and shortages?
Well, I think if universities were to adopt, although if they were able to adopt a kind of more concerted collaborative approach to the way in which we approach industry readiness for candidates, I am instinctively against the idea of training workers, but I think if screen industry's work is understood as collaborative rather than, hey, you can leave this production degree and go and be Martin Scorsese, that is the point at which I think it becomes more useful. And that's a rather glib way of putting it, but I do think there is still a emphasis on the potential for this glittering career. The BBC was historically the training site for the industry. That arm of it has been pretty much ground down to nothing, to the detriment of working conditions across the industry, because people don't understand other people's roles, and that fuels this culture of sort of an internal competition, as it were. I'm slightly losing sight of your question as I ramble on. I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's all. Yeah, really, really useful and interesting.
There's a great possibility at the moment, but what can't happen is, the same noises have been made for decades.
Yeah,
that's the problem. But there at SMTJ, we have so much interest in what we're doing that's happened in the past kind of year or so, that has to be indicative of a shift somewhere. So we just need to kind of keep going with that and try and engage more broadly throughout the industry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions? I have to admit, when you were speaking there, one of the questions that came to mind for me was one problem that we have at Hill University is to get people interested in television as a degree and as a career, because people always feel the need to go for film. And so, despite the fact that obviously the television industry has so many more jobs to offer in the UK, we find it really difficult to get people to have a look at television as a degree. And obviously, I mean, we're really lucky because we've got Paralundra Beadles, who used to be a production manager working in the industry, and she understands the industry incredibly well in terms of precisely all those different roles and the processes of scheduling and the processes of budgeting, and so to some extent, we're really, really lucky in having that resource. And yet getting the students to come and see this is really hard in comparison to precisely the glittering world of film. So, in order to do all the stuff that you are saying, it seems that we need to first get the students to look at the television industry as a job in the first place. And I wonder, I don't know, how are you doing it at Huddersfield, for example? Because Huddersfield has a really, really healthy television group as well. So,
well, I mean, I was very careful in this paper to kind of talk about television, although I do think really what I'm talking about film and TV. Certainly high-end TV, there's a tremendous fluidity between the two sectors, between that and film. And there are very few jobs, that are only applicable to television or only applicable to film. Some of the really high-end effects houses probably don't get much work from TV, but even so, if you watch something like the Philip Pullman adaptation, that would detract from that argument. And so I think they can, and I think they should be taught as an industry within which one can go through and straddle both areas, actually. And I think you're right. I think this speaks to Christine's point about the way in which Steve McQueen tried to frame himself as a cinematic auteur, even though he was making these brilliant films for television. And he did that by amplifying his own role within it, which is not to detract from his own role, it's just to say that it's potentially obscuring of other people's roles. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think film and TV need to be taught as an industry that does work together. And I think, you know, the fact of, and I say this with intense awareness of some of the less good practices from people like Netflix or Disney. They are building studios in London. There are new studios in Bedfordshire and Scotland. And it's at these studios, I think, if there can be an engagement around the projects that they are making, there is potential to kind of get students to understand them as sites that make film and television. And also, you know, just understanding places like soaps or continuing dramas, as you know, Cleo Barnard was made tons of Holby City. That's how she learned to be a director. These are really the sites that now teach people to make drama more than, you know, any BBC body or department in the way that used to. So, you know, but again, the fact I'm kind of reaching for different examples demonstrates the fact there is no body that kind of, as in a kind of conceptual body, or no person who really understands the ways in which all of these currents flow. And I think there's perhaps work to be done around the ways in which training is performed, and with ways most successful as well. But and then you get into the process of evaluation. How do we measure that success? And I think at the moment it's measured in salary or BAFTAs. We need to measure it differently in terms of career sustainability, rather than kind of this idea of it being a glittering career. You know, if you stay in the career and if you have a happy, successful career that allows you to go off and have kids and then come back, that is a marker of success. So it's all about this kind of reconceptualizing and recalibration of it. Again, I've whittled on and not really answered your question. I'm sorry.
You have, actually. So yeah, the focus on combining these two degrees perhaps might be the way forward in order to undermine it, but also really see if we can work with the industry there. I wanted to come back to another thing that you said, which is about the issue of feeling, because obviously that was the theme of your talk. And you know, when you were mentioning the feelings of the mother, for example, that obviously struck so many notes with me, because in a way we have that in higher education to some extent as well. The same problems of a woman feels slightly guilty leaving early, but if the man does, you know, he's celebrated for it. But what struck me about that in the first instance is how invisible these feelings remain as well. And so the question in a way is, how can we bring those feelings to the forefront, considering that, as you said, Betty Friedan's piece is from the 60s, i.e. 60 years old. So how can we do that now in the workplace, rather than, you know, she was talking about obviously women at home, but we clearly need to do that now for the workplace as well.
Well, I can't possibly prescribe a solution for for it, but I would say that I think, you know, if we understand women's issues as everyone's issues. Laura Bates is good on this in her new book, Fix the System, Not the Women, in which she illuminates really well the ways in which sexism is still used against women, even in its kind of, we are proposing this solution way, and the way in which exclusionary practices are kind of used to divide women, rather than say to men, actually, you need to change your behaviour. We did a bit of this in the Lockdown, Locked Out report, where women were continually saying to us, it doesn't really matter what I do. I need my partner, my male partner, to do more childcare. I need my male boss to understand that he needs to do more childcare. There needs to be more kind of visible care work, whether it's for children or elderly parents or ourselves, done within the industry. And it's all about kind of mitigating this idea of film and TV work being a lifestyle. I think that's a really huge issue within the industry, that if you're not kind of performing this lifestyle, you are in some way failing. And I do wonder how applicable this is in academia as well. And so it's about bringing men into the activity in a way that remedies the solution or remedies the work for other people, rather than just lauds the men. I'm to be blunt, I'm very bored of people saying well done to him. Yeah,
I can relate.
Smiles, yes, yeah.
Any further questions? If not, I think we have grilled Rowan quite long enough. So can we perhaps all show our appreciation again? And what I'll do quickly is I'll put in the chat the details of the next session, which starts at 3 o'clock, once the chat loads for me. Sorry, it takes so long. And hopefully it will work. It doesn't. No. Sorry, I'll send an email out to everyone, so that's easier. So thank you again, Rowan, and we will hopefully see all of you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you all. Bye.